standing room only. My father, Robert Gabhart, grew up on a tobacco and dairy farm in rural Kentucky. His day consisted of milking cows, going to school, practicing basketball, working on the farm, and completing his homework. And then he repeated the same routine the next day. Desperate to escape the monotony of farm life, he attended the University of Kentucky, go Wildcats, where he met my wonderful mother. After a brief courtship, they married in 1967. My father enlisted in the Army during the Vietnam War, and my mother gave birth to my two sisters. Then in the late 70s, my family moved to Texas, fortuitously allowing me to be born a native Texan, a fact I never let my non-Texas family forget. For the next 3 decades, my dad poured himself into the lives of others. He served as a gospel preacher, marriage and family counselor, summer youth camp director, soccer referee, and commissioner. And he managed to coach nearly every sport I played. He gave himself selflessly of his time and talents to bless as many lives as he could. After more than 30 years of ministry, he retired from preaching in 2007. He took a job with Child Protective Services for a few years to stay active until he stepped away from work entirely. Shortly after, he was diagnosed with progressive supranuclear palsy, or PSP, a rare brain disorder with similar symptoms to Parkinson's. PSP is an aggressive disease that robs the afflicted of their emotional stability, motor control, and mental acuity in less than a decade. In my father's case, he quickly lost the ability to drive and to walk without assistance. He progressed rapidly from a walker to a weighted walker, and ultimately he was confined to a wheelchair. Soon after, he required a catheter and eventually a feeding tube. In less than 6 years, all his faculties were ripped away from him. On July 29, 2018, Robert Gabhart passed away due to PSP complications. Although he had invested in the lives of others for most of his life, it had been a long time since he'd been able to serve. He hadn't been in the pulpit in 11 years. He hadn't even been able to contribute meaningfully to a relationship during the last 5 years of his life. As we planned the memorial service, we couldn't help but wonder, who would attend after all this time? It was raining heavily the morning of August 11th. And while we'd received a generous outpouring of support since our father's death, we wondered who would venture out. As my sisters and I were texting that morning, one of them shared Harry Truman's quip about weather being the great equalizer in death. It doesn't matter how big a ranch you own or how many cows you brand. The size of your funeral is still going to depend on the weather. With more than a decade separating our father from the lives he'd so intentionally blessed, who would still remember? How many would actually show up? It was standing room only at Lake City's church in Trophy Club, Texas. On that miserable rainy morning, more than 300 people braved the elements to pay their respects. Plans were changed. Vacations were canceled. And people traveled from 6 states to celebrate the life of Robert Gabhart. Person after person shared stories of how our father had influenced their families and changed the trajectory of their lives. They described his profound impact on them and their families 12 years ago, 15 years ago, even 25 years ago. The significant mark he left on each soul compelled them to honor his memory. I learned the true meaning of the word legacy that day.